that fearless authenticity. Connect is showing up as yourself and not being afraid to be real. And I know authenticity has been a buzzword for the past few years, and I think it has gotten some interesting definitions. Because people come to me and they say, Rachel, how can I be real? Because I have different versions of myself. I'm not always the same person. Who I show up with my friends is different than sometimes at work, and I get that. We all have a multifaceted personality. We all have different sides of ourselves. But we have to recognize when we are trying to be someone different, even outside of those facets. Because oftentimes we are putting on filters. Social media is huge, huge. And unfortunately, for the people that utilize it, there is a vast array of filters that completely change what people look like. Have you ever seen someone on social media and didn't recognize them because they were so filtered? You just thought, wow, I don't even see you. And the challenge is that we've filtered out authenticity, even though it's what serves us the most. Because we put those filters on, not only online, we put them on in person. We show up a certain way because we think that people will only want to connect with us, work with us, like us as a human being if we're perfect. But the fact is that we are all perfectly imperfect, and it's our imperfections that allow us to be real enough that people think, I get you. Think about the first person that you met, even in the last 24 hours, that you thought, I can hang out with them. I could spend time with them. I could invest energy into them. And then I want you to think about what drew you to them. Were they posturing? Were they pretending to be someone that is above or someone that's perfect? Because I can tell you, we have never, as a species, been drawn to perfection in terms of personality. We've never met someone and think, oh my gosh, I need to be their friend. I need to work with them because they are perfect. That has never been the case. And yet, so often, we create these opportunities where we think that if we put that mask on, if we put that filter on, then that is what is going to make us more promotable, more collaborative. And it's exactly the opposite. I want to take you back to when I was in law school. So I did pretty well in law school, and I was able to get a job at a very white glove firm. So we had summer clerkships. And it was this very interesting firm because they definitely knew how to work hard, but there was no play hard in their vocabulary. And they had the most interesting thing because they had a drink cart that would come by every hour with only caffeinated beverages. And at one point, I was up to 11 Diet Cokes a day. And I'm pretty sure my liver is still damaged. So there I am drinking my Diet Cokes, and I'm having these conversations with people who are literally starting the second part of their day at 6 o'clock at night. And I know they wondered why a 23-year-old girl would sneak out at 6:30 when all the other summer associates were starting that day with them. I know they wondered why, after the wine just started flowing at those networking events, that I would slink out as well. And I know they wondered why on Sundays I didn't show up in the office, but I did my work at home. I knew they knew I was hiding something, but they definitely didn't know that I was hiding my 3-year-old son. I was 20 years old when I had my son. And so at that point, he was 3 years old, and I had been judged so many times. And so I decided that I needed to be perfect if I was going to fit into this firm. I decided that I needed to be perfect if I was going to get the job. And so I would exit out of these conversations. People would start to talk about their children, and I would exit out because I didn't want to lie, but I also didn't want to share. And I would have these conversations with partners that would talk about they don't know their kids' teachers' names, they don't barely know their kids' names and birth dates, and everything was just so focused on billable hours. And if you loved anything but that, you weren't accepted. And eventually I told the truth because it's really hard to hide a kid. And so I told them, and I was still offered a position, which I politely declined because I realized that was not my environment. But the damage was done because it is not about the crime, it's about the cover-up, right? All of a sudden, I didn't trust myself around them. I felt uncomfortable, and I'm sure they probably questioned, well, what else then? And so we have these illusions of perfection, but they're never going to build real relationships. What we need is to be more ourselves. And I just shared a very personal story, and that's not necessarily what needs to happen in the first conversation with someone. Everyone earns your story along the way. All of a sudden, people are like, thank goodness, I didn't think you were gonna have me start just laying it all out there. But think about, what are we holding back? How can we be more of ourselves? How can we have bigger, better, more real conversations with people without the fatigue that comes from hiding who we are? And with the authenticity, energetic jumpstart that happens from being who you really feel to be and sharing who you are and knowing that the right people are going to connect with you even more. It's part of the reason why during the pandemic and for a remote workforce such as Vigilance, I actually love when a dog comes on the screen or a child runs in the room. Who finds that to be humanizing, right? It forced us out of ourselves in a way. And so the more that we can do that in every situation that we're able to do so, we're going to build better connections. Now, as I said, as I got up here initially, I am all about connecting, and I can't do that completely from the stage. I'm going to need you to connect as well. So I know there is someone that is near you, whether they're in front of you, in back of you, to the side of you, that you don't know as well. And I know that everyone tends to sit next to someone that they know because safety in numbers, right? But there's someone there that you don't know as well. And so I'd love for you to just pair up with them for just a few minutes. And we're gonna share something that you learned the hard way. It could be the coffee was too hot, which it wasn't. It was actually perfect, and the 4 cups are really kicking in. But it could be, TSA is just as good as it's always been. But I'd love for you to share that, and it can go as deep as you want it to be, or as superficial as we need, because baby steps are part of this as well. And then we're gonna come back, okay? Go. And so there are 2 things that I have found to be essential if you want to be a relatable communicator. You have to be present, and you have to be adaptable. And we're going to start with present because it's the toughest one in this day and age. The fact is that there is no deeper desire for a human being than to feel important. We want to be seen, and we want to be heard. And I admit, I talk about this, and I'm not always that good at it. So I was actually, during COVID, spent an enormous amount of time, as most of us did, with our families. And there's a reason why I travel for a living. So I'm with my daughter, who's now 11, so she's 10 at the time, and we're sitting on the couch and we're watching something she's seen a million times. It's Incredibles 2. She knows the words to everything. And she's over there, she's got her hand on the popcorn, and she is laughing and engaged and just loving every second of it. And you know what I'm doing? Well, one, I have my hand on the popcorn because I never miss out on good food. So I still got the popcorn going, but my other hand is on my phone. It's on my phone, and I'm shopping for things on Amazon that I do not need, and definitely don't need in 2 days. Also, don't get anything delivered while you're traveling if you live with your partner. It's a bad idea. There's some resentment building. We're going to work through that. But so I was shopping. And she looks at me, and she's got these enormous saucer brown eyes, and she looks at me and she goes, "Mom, can you just put the phone down and watch the movie with me?" I get it. I'm not an emotional person, but man, it gets me. It gets me because she's right. She's right. I wasn't being present. And you know how that makes people feel? Have you ever been in a conversation where you know someone's just not there? How does it make you feel? Shout it out.
Terrible.
Terrible. It's terrible. It makes you feel like you're not worthy of conversation. It makes you feel like you are not important. And if we want to relate to people, if we want to make people feel like they're seen and heard, we have to start with our presence. My friend just sent out an invitation for her party. And she said, "Your presence is far more important than any presence you can bring." And I was like, that's a lie. But I'll be there. We have to start to think about how we show up. We have to start to think about how we make people feel if we're going to truly make connections that matter at work, at home, in love. There was a man who was really good at this, and that was Mr. Rogers. Now, remember I just told you about that group of 18-year-olds put Mr. Rogers on stage, on screen, and
Just a bunch of blank stares on that one too. And I was like, this is what's wrong with America. Right here. The fact that they don't know who Mr. Rogers is problematic. And I was like, but didn't you at least see the documentary? That was like 2 years ago. You were probably like 12. No, didn't watch that either. So Tom Hanks played Mr. Rogers. Anybody see that documentary? How cool was that? So I grew up with Mr. Rogers. I thought he was just the most amazing human being because he made people feel important that weren't on set with him. You were a child watching that, and you knew that you were important. And so it was 1985, 86, and Mr. Rogers is at the height of his career, height of his popularity, but also so was someone else, Oprah, although she's still at the height of her popularity, so she's like a plateau in a good way, not like a diet one. So Oprah calls Mr. Rogers and says, hey, we'd love to have you on the show. And it's probably not Oprah, it was probably a producer. And Mr. Rogers says, absolutely, I would love to, under one condition. There cannot be any children in the audience. And they were like, oh, that's kind of your jam. I don't know why. Like, you don't like kids all of a sudden? That's kind of weird. And I just said, no, I don't want any families in the audience, but I'd love to talk to you about what I do and my intention, my purpose in this world. And so they book them. And TV does what it does best, which is completely ignore the wishes of the people on camera. Anybody ever work in TV here? I met someone at the bar that did, and I was like, oh, yeah, it's kindred spirits for like getting through the war. So he goes to the set, and he sits on stage, and he looks out, and it's all families. Families everywhere. And so he's in a conversation, probably in chairs just like this, talking to Oprah, and this little girl breaks free from her mom, runs down to stage, and asks him for a hug. And do you know what he did? He stopped everything. Stopped everything, stopped talking to Oprah, and got up, kneeled down, and gave that little girl a hug. And then a little boy decided, I need to make sure the train that you constructed up on Oprah's set is fully functioning. He was a little afraid. He was like, could go off the rails at any moment, kind of like me. And so he comes down, and Mr. Rogers stops everything again and connects with that little boy and makes sure that he doesn't feel scared anymore about what's going on that stage. He knew exactly who was important to him. He knew exactly who he needed to make a priority. And he followed that down through everything. And the moral of this story is that if Mr. Rogers can ignore Oprah, I can ignore my phone. If Mr. Rogers can ignore Oprah, we can stop with the distractions and allow the people in front of us to feel as important as those little children did and to feel as safe. Our presence really comes down to three things, and it's eye contact. Eye contact means that I am invested, I am in. I am here for you, and I am actually invested in what you have to say and who you are. And I know it's hard, and I'm not gonna make you do one of those weird staring exercises, I promise. I have done that before on television. They're still angry at me. It's really awkward, uncomfortable, but it does work. Eye contact is real. It really does start to make a connection. And how many here have had those conversations, right, where someone's not looking at you and you're like, what am I doing? Like, why am I here? And so if eye contact is a challenge, which it often is for people, you can baby step into that. The second is curious listening, which I think is active listening squared. Active listening is cool. It means I am actually paying attention to you. But we have to get curious about one another. We have to get curious because curiosity is where that importance of feeling comes from, where that person that's being asked questions in not like an interrogation kind of way, but they're in front of someone who's actually curious about who they are, what they do, what they love, who they love, all of the things in life that matter to them. It hits differently. So when we think about curious listening, we think, what is that next level of listening I can engage in? How can I get more curious about the people around me, about my teams, about my colleagues, about my friends, my loved ones? Because studies show, and I am a research nerd, that the more that someone talks in a conversation, the highest they rate it. And so that means if you can just get a little curious, you can hack the system. All of a sudden, everybody that you're talking to is going to feel better about you and about the situation because they felt important. And lastly is eliminating those distractions. I get it, we don't have phones anymore. We have little computers, right? That's not a phone. My mom has a phone. It still flips. She's not gonna change. We have little computers in our hands that notify us every time something happens. Every time something happens, something else pops up, whether it's a news story, a text message, a flight check-in, something completely irrelevant. They're constantly distracting us. And when we allow that distraction to interfere with our presence, we are not communicating. So we have to eliminate those distractions in a way that makes you think of Mr. Rogers and pay attention to what's important and what's in front of you.